They say that saying, sorry, is a sign of strength, a mark of humility, grace, and emotional maturity. But what about the people who apologize for breathing too loudly in a quiet room? Who say, sorry, when someone else bumps into them? Who apologize for existing in a space they were invited into? There's a kind of apology that isn't about accountability, it's about survival. You've learned to say sorry before anyone can say you're wrong. You apologize for needing, for asking, for simply being present. And over time, these two syllables, I'm sorry, have become less of a confession and more of a shield. A reflexive armor you wear to make yourself smaller, quieter, less of a burden. But here's the truth no one talks about. Chronic apologizing isn't politeness. It's a symptom. A quiet signal that something inside you learned long ago that your presence requires permission. Let's begin. You say, sorry, when you ask a question. Sorry when you need clarification. Sorry when you speak up in a meeting. Sorry when you enter a room. Sorry when someone interrupts you. Sorry when you didn't do anything wrong at all. It happens so fast you don't even notice. The word slips out before the thought forms. A reflex. Automatic. Like blinking when something flies toward your face. And most of the time, people don't notice either. They accept your apology without question, without pause. Because in their world, maybe it makes sense. Maybe you were in the way. Maybe you did interrupt. Maybe your presence was inconvenient. But you notice. Somewhere deep inside, you feel it, the quiet erosion. The slow disappearing act you perform every single day. Because chronic apologizing isn't really about the words. It's about what those words are protecting you from. Each sorry is a shield against anger, against rejection, against the possibility that someone might look at you and decide you're too much trouble, that you're not worth the space you occupy, that your needs are an inconvenience they didn't sign up for. So you apologize first. You apologize preemptively. You make yourself small before anyone can tell you that you're taking up too much room. It's exhausting. And the strangest part? Most people who apologize for everything don't realize how often they do it. It's become so woven into the fabric of who they are that it feels like breathing. Natural. Necessary. Just the way they move through the world. But here's what's quietly devastating. Every unnecessary apology is a small act of self-erasure. It's a message you send to yourself over and over again. I shouldn't be here. I'm in the way. My presence requires justification. And over time, that message doesn't just stay on the surface. It sinks in. It becomes belief. It becomes identity. You stop asking for what you need because asking feels like a burden. You stop sharing your thoughts because your thoughts feel irrelevant. You stop taking up space because space feels like something you have to earn, not something you're entitled to simply by being human. The apology becomes more than a word. It becomes a way of life. A constant negotiation with the world for the right to exist in it. And the question no one asks, the question that sits quietly beneath every sorry, is this. What are you really apologizing for? No child is born apologizing for their existence. Babies cry without shame. Toddlers demand attention without guilt. Young children ask for what they need without fearing they're asking for too much. So where does it start? This belief that your presence is something to apologize for? It starts in the spaces where your needs were treated as inconveniences. Maybe you grew up in a home where someone was always angry, where the emotional temperature was unpredictable, where you learned to read faces, voices, footsteps, trying to predict the storm before it hit. And you discovered that being small, being quiet, being sorry could sometimes soften the blow. Or maybe you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where affection was given only when you were good, only when you didn't ask for too much, only when you made yourself easy to manage. And you learned that needing things made you a burden, that expressing yourself made you difficult, that taking up space made you unlovable. Or maybe you grew up in a home where someone else's emotions always came first. Where you were the peacekeeper, the mediator, the one responsible for everyone else's comfort. And you learned that your role was to manage other people's feelings, to absorb their discomfort, to apologize for tensions you didn't create, to make yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. Sometimes it wasn't overt. There was no yelling, no cruelty, no visible neglect. Just a quiet, pervasive message embedded in 1,000 small interactions. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Stop being so dramatic. And slowly, imperceptibly, you learned that your emotions were wrong. That your perceptions couldn't be trusted. That your reactions were excessive. And if your feelings were always the problem, then the logical solution was simple. Apologize for having them. This is where the reflex is born. Not in a single traumatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of experiences that taught you that your existence, your needs, your feelings, your presence, required constant justification. You learned to apologize not because you were doing something wrong, but because existing without apology felt dangerous. And here's the heartbreaking truth. The people who taught you this may not have intended to. They may have been struggling themselves. They may have been doing the best they could with the tools they had. But intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact was this. You learned that love and acceptance were things you had to earn by being less, by needing less, by asking for less, by being sorry for the space you took up in the world. From a psychological perspective, chronic apologizing is often a manifestation of hypervigilance, a state where your nervous system is constantly scanning for threat. But the threat isn't physical. It's social, emotional, relational. Your brain has learned that disapproval, rejection, or anger from others feels dangerous. And so it does what all brains do when they perceive danger. It tries to protect you. The apology becomes a form of appeasement. A way to signal to others, and to yourself, that you're not a threat. That you're cooperative. That you won't cause problems. That you're safe to be around. In attachment theory, this pattern often emerges in people with anxious or disorganized attachment styles. Those who learned early on that relationships were unpredictable, that love could be withdrawn, that connection required constant effort and monitoring. If you grew up unsure whether your caregivers would be emotionally available, you may have developed a heightened sensitivity to relational cues. You learned to read micro-expressions, vocal tones, body language. You became an expert at detecting shifts in mood, sensing tension before it fully formed. And apologizing became one of your tools. A way to de-escalate. A way to restore harmony. A way to prevent abandonment. But here's what makes this pattern so difficult to break. It works. Kind of. Apologizing does often diffuse tension. It does sometimes make people soften. It does create a momentary sense of safety. But it's a safety built on self-abandonment. Because every time you apologize for something that doesn't require an apology, you're prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own reality. You're saying, in effect, your feelings matter more than mine. Your perception is more valid than my experience. I will shrink so you can expand. And your nervous system, which is supposed to protect you, starts to see you as the problem. Over time, this creates a painful internal conflict. Part of you knows the apologies are excessive. Part of you resents having to constantly manage other people's emotions. Part of you is exhausted from the endless self-monitoring. But another part of you is terrified of what might happen if you stop. What if people get angry? What if they leave? What if they decide you're difficult, demanding, too much? So you keep apologizing. Not because you want to, but because the fear of what might happen if you don't feels bigger than the cost of continuing. This is the trap. And it's one that keeps millions of people locked in a cycle of self-erasure, one sorry at a time. There's a kind of guilt that doesn't attach itself to anything specific. It's not about something you did wrong. It's not about a mistake you made or a boundary you crossed. It's a guilt that simply exists. A low hum in the background of your life. A constant, quiet feeling that you owe the world something just for being in it. You feel guilty for asking someone to repeat themselves. Guilty for needing help. Guilty for taking up time, attention, space. Guilty for having problems. Guilty for not having your life together. Guilty for being sad when others have it worse. Guilty for being happy when others are struggling. Guilty for existing in a way that might inconvenience someone else. This is the emotional landscape of the chronic apologizer. A world where your default state is a feeling of being too much and not enough at the same time. Too much emotion. Not enough control. Too many needs. Not enough self-sufficiency. Too much presence. Not enough invisibility. And what's so insidious about this kind of guilt is that it doesn't respond to logic. You can know, intellectually, that you have a right to take up space. You can understand, rationally, that asking for help doesn't make you a burden. You can recognize, consciously, that your needs are valid. But the feeling doesn't care what you know. Because this guilt isn't about truth. It's about safety. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being too much was dangerous. That your needs could push people away. That your emotions could overwhelm others. That your presence could be a problem. And guilt became the emotion that kept you in check. The internal alarm system that warned you when you were getting too close to being too much. So you apologize. Not because you did something wrong, but because the guilt tells you that simply existing without constant self-monitoring is risky. And the exhaustion of carrying this invisible weight is profound. It's exhausting to constantly second-guess yourself, to replay conversations in your head, analyzing every word, every tone, every reaction, looking for evidence that you messed up, that you were too much, that you should have been different. It's exhausting to feel like you're always one mistake away from being too much trouble to keep around. It's exhausting to live in a body that feels like it's constantly apologizing for taking up oxygen. And yet, you keep going. You keep apologizing. You keep making yourself smaller. Because the alternative, existing without apology, without guilt, without the constant need to justify your presence, feels impossible. Like a language you were never taught. A freedom you were never given permission to claim. Every apology is a translation. Beneath the word, sorry, is another sentence. A deeper truth that you're not saying out loud. A fear you're trying to manage. A need you're trying to meet. When you say, sorry, for asking a question, what you're really saying is, please don't think I'm stupid. Please don't be annoyed that I didn't understand. Please don't regret giving me your time. When you apologize for needing help, what you're really saying is, please don't see me as weak. Please don't think I'm incompetent. Please don't abandon me for not having it all together. When you say, sorry, for taking up space, what you're really saying is, please don't be angry that I'm here. Please don't resent me for existing in your proximity. Please don't wish I would disappear. Each sorry is a plea, a negotiation, a quiet attempt to control how others perceive you, how they feel about you, whether they'll stay. Because what you're most afraid of isn't really anger or judgment or annoyance. What you're most afraid of is abandonment. The chronic apologizer lives with a deep, often unspoken terror that they are fundamentally too much trouble to love. That their needs will eventually exhaust the people around them. That their presence is a burden that others tolerate rather than enjoy. And every apology is an attempt to prevent that outcome. To stay ahead of rejection by rejecting yourself first. To make yourself so small, so easy, so undemanding that no one will have a reason to leave. But here's the painful paradox. The more you apologize for existing, the less of you there is to connect with. People may accept your apologies. They may appreciate your politeness, your consideration, your lack of drama. But they're not really seeing you. They're seeing the carefully managed version you've constructed. The one that never asks for too much. The one that never causes problems. The one that's always, always sorry. And beneath that version is the real you. The one with needs, with boundaries, with opinions, with the audacity to take up space without apology. The one who's terrified that if they show up fully, they'll be rejected completely. So you keep apologizing. You keep translating your fear into politeness. You keep offering preemptive absolution for crimes you haven't committed. And the real question, the one that sits at the heart of all of this, is simple. What would it feel like to exist without having to constantly justify your existence? What would it feel like to be seen, fully, without the armor of apology? The shift doesn't usually come from someone telling you to stop apologizing. It comes from a moment of recognition. A quiet, painful realization that you've been living your entire life as a guest in your own experience. Sometimes it's a small thing that triggers it. Someone interrupts you, and you start to say, sorry, and then you pause. You notice. You catch yourself mid-apology, and for the first time, you wonder, why am I apologizing? What did I do wrong? Nothing. You did nothing wrong. And that realization lands with unexpected weight. Or maybe it's a moment when someone points it out gently. A friend says, you don't have to apologize for that. And instead of brushing it off, you sit with it. You start counting how many times you say, sorry, in a single conversation. And the number horrifies you. Or maybe it's exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep exhaustion from the constant self-monitoring, the endless internal negotiation, the weight of making yourself small enough to fit into everyone else's comfort. And you realize, you can't keep living like this. But recognition doesn't mean change is easy. Because the moment you see the pattern clearly, you also see how deeply it's woven into who you've become. How much of your identity is built on being the person who doesn't cause problems. The person who's easy. The person who apologizes. And there's grief in that. Grief for all the times you made yourself smaller. Grief for all the needs you didn't express. Grief for all the years you spent believing that your presence required constant justification. This is the part no one talks about. The turning point isn't triumphant. It's tender, painful, raw. Because you can't change the pattern without first mourning what the pattern cost you. You have to sit with the uncomfortable truth that you've been abandoning yourself. That in trying to prevent others from rejecting you, you've been rejecting yourself constantly, preemptively, automatically. And you have to decide, gently, without pressure, without expectation, whether you're ready to try something different. Not to become someone who never apologizes. Not to swing to the opposite extreme of refusing accountability or care. But to begin the slow, uncertain work of learning to exist without armor. To speak without preemptive apology. To need without shame. To take up space without guilt. To trust that your presence doesn't require permission. This is where healing begins. Not in a moment of sudden transformation, but in a quiet choice to stop making yourself smaller. Even when it feels terrifying. Even when you don't know how. Unlearning the reflex doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small, awkward moments. In the space between the impulse to apologize and the decision not to. It happens when you ask a question without saying, sorry, first, and your heart races, and you feel exposed, and you wait for the punishment that never comes. It happens when you express a need, clearly, directly, without cushioning it with apology, and the other person just responds. Without anger. Without resentment. Without making you feel like you've asked for too much. It happens when someone bumps into you and you don't say, sorry. You just move. You just exist. And the world doesn't collapse. These moments feel small, insignificant, but they're not. Each one is an act of reclaiming. A quiet rebellion against the belief that your existence requires constant justification. But it's not linear. There will be days when you catch yourself. Days when you notice the apology only after it's already left your mouth. Days when the old pattern resurfaces, especially under stress, especially in relationships that echo old dynamics. And that's okay. Because healing isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. About building a new relationship with yourself. One where your presence is not something to apologize for, but something to honor. One of the hardest parts of this process is learning to tolerate other people's discomfort without immediately trying to fix it with an apology. Because the truth is, sometimes people will be annoyed. Sometimes they'll be inconvenienced. Sometimes they won't like what you say or need or ask for. And that doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means you're human. It means you're taking up space. It means you're no longer shrinking to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be. Learning to exist without permission means accepting that you can't control how others perceive you. That trying to manage everyone's emotions through preemptive apology is a losing game. That you are allowed to exist fully, even if that fullness occasionally creates friction. It means recognizing that real connection doesn't come from making yourself smaller. It comes from showing up as you are, messy, imperfect, flawed, human, and trusting that the people who are meant to stay will stay. Not because you're easy, but because you're real. And slowly, gently, you start to notice something shifting. The apologies become less automatic. The guilt becomes less constant. The fear of taking up space becomes less overwhelming. You begin to trust that your presence is not a burden, that your needs are not too much, that you have a right to exist, fully, unapologetically, in this world. There's a freedom that comes when you stop apologizing for existing. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It's quiet, subtle, like the feeling of setting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. It's the freedom to walk into a room and just be there, without performing, without managing, without the constant internal negotiation about whether you're taking up too much space or not enough. It's the freedom to speak in a meeting without the preamble of "sorry," to ask a question without softening it, to disagree without immediately backtracking. It's the freedom to make a mistake and offer a genuine apology when one is warranted, without the layers of shame and catastrophic thinking that used to accompany every error. Because now you understand the difference between accountability and self-abandonment. It's the freedom to say no, to set a boundary, to express a need, and to not immediately follow it with "sorry for being difficult." It's the freedom to exist in relationships where your presence is wanted, not tolerated, where people don't need you to be smaller to feel comfortable around you, where your needs aren't treated as inconveniences, but as natural parts of being human. And perhaps most profoundly, it's the freedom to forgive yourself. To forgive yourself for all the years you spent shrinking, for all the times you apologized when you shouldn't have, for all the ways you abandoned yourself in the name of keeping the peace. Because you were doing the best you could with what you knew. You were trying to survive. You were trying to protect yourself in the only way you knew how. And now you're learning a different way. Not by becoming someone who never apologizes, but by becoming someone who knows when an apology is genuine and when it's just armor. Someone who can take up space without guilt, who can exist without permission, who can be fully human, flawed, messy, imperfect, without constantly bracing for rejection. This is the quiet kind of freedom. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but makes peace with it. The kind that doesn't promise you'll never struggle again, but promises that you're learning to be on your own side. And in that freedom, something unexpected emerges. Presence. Real, unguarded, unapologetic presence. Not the carefully managed version you used to offer, but the full, authentic you. The you that was always there. Beneath the apologies. Beneath the fear. Beneath the belief that your existence was something to be sorry for. The you that was always, always enough. If this video made you feel seen, if parts of this reflection felt uncomfortably familiar, know that you're not alone in this experience. So many people move through the world carrying the invisible weight of unnecessary apology. So many have learned to make themselves smaller to feel safer. And so many are beginning to recognize, just as you might be, that there's another way to exist. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to stop apologizing overnight. Healing from this pattern is gradual, tender work. And simply becoming aware of it, simply noticing the reflex, is already a profound first step. If you'd like to stay connected to reflections like this, if you'd like to continue exploring the hidden patterns of the human heart, you're welcome to subscribe. This is a space where we look gently at the parts of ourselves we've been taught to apologize for, where we examine the quiet ways we've learned to shrink, and where we remember, together, that our presence doesn't require permission. If something in this video resonated with you, or if you have your own experience with chronic apologizing, you're welcome to share in the comments below. Not because you have to, but because sometimes, putting words to something you've carried silently can help someone else feel a little less alone. And if you're not ready to share, that's okay too. Your healing doesn't require performance. It only requires gentleness. Thank you for being here, for watching, for reflecting, for taking up space, even if it still feels uncomfortable. You deserve to exist without apology.